Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. The Americans left Afghanistan, leaving behind a huge cache of equipment, aircraft, weapons, ammunition, and so on and so forth. Our discussion is wide around the strategic circles. Firstly, to understand why the Americans did what they did. Secondly, to understand what does the Taliban actually have. When we look at the list it is there in the outside in the public domain, one thing that strikes out is the Air Force assets. To discuss all that, I have with me Air Marshal Anil Khosla, PVSM, AVSM, BM, a retired Air Force officer who was the 41st Vice Chief of the Indian Air Force. He's an expert, of course, in aviation as well as maritime operations. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me for this discussion to understand what the Taliban has in their hands.
Thanks, Aadi. It's always a pleasure recording with you on military matters and strategic matters, current one especially. And Afghanistan is one hot topic at the moment, and you've done most of interviews, which I have also seen. And also in the media, what I've seen is a lot of speculation is going on about what all has been left in Afghanistan by US after the withdrawal, especially the weapons and the equipment and technology and what all. And there is not much of clarity on the subject as such. But a lot of speculation is also going on that if high technology equipment is left and it may fall into the hands of Pakistan or China, or for that matter, extremists, Taliban-led Afghanistan, and how they're going to use it and where can it be used and can it be reverse engineered and all sort of things. So I think talking about the air power assets, their status and all is required at the moment. But just let me put one or two things in perspective, Adi, before we start. One is we'll be talking about air power assets in Afghanistan at the moment. But also we'll be talking a little bit about a broader perspective because they cannot be spoken in isolation as such. So why did the US left? Why did Afghanistan forces didn't hold up against Taliban? They were expected to. Where did US or the Western forces go wrong? Aspects related to Afghanistan and Taliban. What are the players now? What is the US role is going to be in future? How is the China and Pakistan have a role in development of Afghanistan, or what sort of things will, what should India do? And, what is the situation now and in future likely to be some sort of crystal gazing. So all these aspects are interrelated. So they will need to be mentioned somewhere or the other.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So coming to the topic proper, that is the air assets or air power assets, I would say, which are in Afghanistan. It's very necessary to understand two things. One is the air assets which already belong to Afghanistan Air Force. You understand? Afghanistan Air Force has certain amount of assets which have been given by various countries as well as their whatever over the period of time they have acquired. That is one part. And second part is the equipment and platforms and the systems and weapons and other things which US military was using. And while withdrawing, they have left behind. So these two combined, we need to look into, not in isolation, only what equipment US has left. So we need to look into the status and the strength of both combined together. So that is the perspective I want to put before we proceed further.
Oh, very true, sir. The fighting force will be a combination of the land and air assets in any sort of a scenario. And, it'll be important. I mean, although questions do remain on the virality of the usage and the style of usage of the Taliban, but we still need to understand in a conventional sense what all can be done with the amount of equipment they have. Well, so to begin with, I'd like you to just throw a little light on the US withdrawal, how they did the entire thing on the ground, especially with regards looking at the air power aspect of it, and secondly, what all have they left behind in terms of the assets for the Taliban in terms of the Air Force as well, sir?
Yeah. So, very valid question. What is existing on ground there? Okay. So, I'll just cover a few aspects of it. As I said, there are two aspects of it. One is Afghanistan Air Force assets, and second is the US assets which they were using while war against terrorism from Afghanistan. So as far as Afghanistan Air Force is concerned, we have a fair idea of what is left. Okay. But as far as the assets which the Americans have left, there is no clarity as such. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about Afghanistan Air Force. So it will be in order, I think, Adi, if you give me a minute or two to talk about the historical perspective of Afghanistan Air Force. Okay, so Afghanistan Air Force was established way back in 1921, and I am not commenting on what sort of form it was in and all that. It was modernized in 1960. Then 1980, the Soviets built it up. Okay, and in 1992, there were already almost about 350 aircraft with Afghanistan Air Force, which is a large number. I'll not talk about the quality or the what type of aircraft and all, but it's a large number. Then 1990s Civil War, as they progressed, these assets kept dwindling in the sense they got destroyed or whatever. And finally, it was left about 35 to 40 aircraft. What I'm saying is from 350 aircraft, they came down to 35 to 40 aircraft, hardly anything. Then 2001, when the Americans moved in, the Afghanistan Air Force had just a meager fleet of helicopters or so. 2007 onwards, the U.S. Air Force, they formed an organization called U.S.-led organization called Combined Air Power Transition Force. That means their mandate was to rebuild the capability or modernize the Afghanistan Air Force to whatever this thing. Now, 221, when the Americans were leaving, Afghanistan Air Force, the strength was 180 plus aircraft. Actually, it was 200 plus aircraft and about 7,000 airmen. So this is the historical background coming to the present status. Okay, so that is Afghanistan Air Force. Now, as I said, it cannot be talked about in isolation. There is an organization called SIPRI, that is Stockholm International Peace and Research Institution. They basically collect data. They have been established. They've been there from 1966 onward. They collect data on and analyze on military expenditure by various countries in the world. What sort of arms trade takes place? What about disarmament? What about arms control? All these issues, and they periodically publish a lot of documents related to it. This month, on 3rd September, they published a document called it's called topical background. That means they pick up a topic and give a background to it, and they chose Afghanistan. And the specific thing they chose was major arm transfer inflow in Afghanistan in the last 20 years. That is 2001 to 2021, the time when the US was there. And very interesting this thing. So if you interested or the viewers are interested, they should go through the document. It's available in open domain. SIPRI is the SP. SIPRI is the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. They have a site and they have the. So in that, it gives you all the documents, all the equipment, military, that is army as well as air assets. So to give you a sort of this thing background, I will just cover few of the air assets which have been given in the last 20 years. Not necessarily that they will be there, but it will give you an idea of what sort of things have been pumped into Afghan Air Force. So as per SIPRI's publication, 16 nations, they gave arms and equipment to Afghanistan in the last 20 years. Okay, mix of new as well as some second-hand and some refurbished or refurbished equipment. Now, if you take in air assets only, US was the largest. They gave almost 34 Cessna class of armed light transport aircraft, 53 transport helicopters of UH-68, 65 Scan Eagle unarmed UAVs, basically recce purpose and all, and almost 250 paveway guided missiles, that laser guided missiles, bombs. So you can get a feel of what all equipment has been given. I'm not covering the entire thing. I'm just covering few of this thing. Russia was the second largest. They gave 90 second-hand new mix of Mi-8 and Mi-17 helicopters. Very large number. Okay, then others like Italy, UK, Brazil, they also given equipment. Like Italy is given 16 second-hand transport helicopters. UK gave some Mi-17 helicopters, transport helicopters. And some of the countries don't give directly. They pay for the equipment to be given by some other country.
Okay.
If it's a Russian origin, they pay the Russia and the equipment comes. So that at least there's some commonality of equipment in the country. Otherwise, there'll be hodgepodge. Then Brazil gave 26 Super Tucanos, A-29 trainer oblique combat aircraft. And even India has given 3 Cheetal helicopters and 4 Mi-25s. Then Switzerland gave 18 PC-12. So you get a flavor of what items have been given. But if you analyze all these, there are two or three things stand out. One is helicopter intensive. Did you notice most of the countries it was helicopters, helicopters, and helicopters. And second was uh, that most of these assets are towards making capability which is tactical in nature. It's not very high technology. It's tactical nature and all. Okay, and most of the items are related to movement of troops, assisting in mobility, local mobility, not strategic mobility, that means helicopters and light transport aircraft, and sustaining these forces within the country. So that is the flavor of equipment which came. Okay, so this gives you, I'm not giving you the exact status which we'll talk about subsequently as we progress, but I've given you a flavor of what went into Afghanistan Air Force as is the same. I can maybe cover here itself when Americans left. What was the strength of the Afghan Air Force? I think I'll cover it here itself. So at the moment when they left, they had Afghanistan Air Force. I'm talking about 200, almost 211 fixed wing and rotary aircraft. Okay, out of which 23 were Super Tucano Y829, 10 odd light attack aircraft AC-208, then fixed wing 23 of Cessna 208, then PC-12 Pilatus surveillance aircraft, then C-130 Hercules, very limited number, 3 or 4. This is what fixed wing assets Afghanistan Air Force had. Now, rotary wing, when you talk about, mainstay was Black Hawk US-60 helicopters, which are 45 this thing, and Mi-8, Mi-17 combined helicopters of Russian origin, about 56. So if you notice, 150 odd helicopters and about 60 odd fixed wing assets Afghanistan Air Force had. As far as US is concerned, there is no clarity on the numbers which are left behind, and status-wise, we'll talk about subsequently later on. Yeah, Adi.
Interesting that you mentioned that the entire power which has been built up not by the US but pretty much a lot of countries around the world was more or less tactical in nature. And we see a similarity in the workings of the Afghan National Army as well. So it's basically what you've brought out pretty nicely, as a matter of fact, is that the style of the operations of the people that were trained in that country was not to defend the country. It was basically to go after the insurgents and so on and so forth, which is very, very interesting to find out. Sir. So one big question that everybody, I think, has been, kicking the USA because of which this entire mess has actually come into the limelight is the fact that, the US knew for years now that they were going to go out there. They had enough time to either destroy them, to fly them out, to relocate, to do. There's 50 things. I mean, they could have, as a joke, I'm saying this, they could have just called India. I'm sure we would have sent 10 pilots, rotationary job, and all the aircraft would have been in India. I mean, it's as simple as that. The Pakistanis would have happily done it. Why did they leave so much with the Taliban?
Yeah, very interesting question, Andy. I think everyone is asking this. But when you go through the media reports and what all is coming through, some things stand out. Okay, I'll cover one by one various factors which would have gone into this thing. But let me putting things in perspective. Actually, a lot of things which have been left behind are mainly in the land warfare domain. Okay, arms, ammunition, armored vehicles, and things like that. Okay, flying machines, not that many. Okay, and whatever have been left also are not in a very they say that they are not flyworthy machines or nothing worthwhile in it. Okay, I'll just cover a few factors why Americans did what they did and what we're calling it a mess and all. Firstly, question is asked is why they've withdrawn now. Okay, very straightforward answer is there. The cost is very high. Some of the writings which I've seen, it's working out to some millions per day, and the total cost they're talking about trillions. I mean, it's a costly intervention. Okay, more than the money part, it's a human cost here. 800,000 personnel have been deployed sometime or the other in the last 20 years. There have been 2,500 American casualties. I'm talking about only American soldiers, the civilians and the allied and other this thing also. More than that, the psychological or the mind factor. one of the reports I was reading, I don't know whether I can't quote that numbers, but they're talking about 18 per day. I mean, that sounds to me very high, but I don't want to quote the numbers. Number of suicide of veterans here because of the psyche has been affected so much by these deployments. Okay, so that is one reason why they have deployed. I mean, why they have this thing. Now, as I said earlier, what they left is mainly army-centric equipment and all that. Air assets, not so much, and all those who have been left are not fly-worthy machines. Okay. Second is aspect I want to bring out, Adi, is withdrawal is a part of army or are the military tactics or a military this thing. Every military doctrine or a guiding strategy has a portion on withdrawal. That how are you going to withdraw? Okay, it exists. The SOPs exist. It includes what all assets you will take back, what all assets in case you are leaving back you will destroy, or what all essential things you will take out. For example, if you remember, Americans went for Osama bin Laden, correct? And one of the helicopters crashed. They blew up that helicopter. The special forces, they blew up the helicopter so that it does not fall in the hands of somebody else, and they gain out of it. Am I right? So, similarly, nothing of high technology they would have left behind. They're not fools. I mean, they're all world number one or whatever you say on the superpower. Okay. Second aspect, they had adequate notice. The original contract was not contract. I won't say agreement was with Taliban was that February it was finalized that by 1st May they will withdraw, and then because of change of regime in USA, it got postponed to 30th August. Maybe they wanted to do it before the 20th anniversary of 9/11, right? But what I'm bringing out is 6 months notice is there, and they're no fools. So 6 months they would have looked into these aspects. The second thing is the next important thing is there is certain capability of Afghanistan forces which need to be retained even when the Americans are withdrawing. If they have taken everything, then once again they would have got criticized by the world that you have left them high and dry here after 20 years, correct? So they have to leave some capability with the Afghanistan forces. You cannot take away everything. Okay. Next thing is if you do some cost versus benefit analysis in the sense, some media may I saw somebody did it for one of the ground assets that is regarding I think armored personnel carriers. They say so many in number. If you have to airlift them in an aircraft of C-17 class, so many come, so many sorties will be required, translate into money, and it was coming into millions of rupees. So similarly, if you do for aerial assets, if they're just shells which we are left behind, if the cost is coming out too much, then might even leave them behind if there are no military use to anyone or nothing can be derived out of it, correct? So that is another factor. Then, most important factor to my mind, the Americans would have thought about is the priority. The American president gave a speech that he brought out. He said this was the largest human evacuation, 1,20,000 people or something like that, 1,20,000 or 23,000, some figure like that. I mean, it's a very large number, and the priority was American soldiers, American citizens, allied forces and their citizens, and Afghans who helped them out. So that is the priority rather than taking something which is of no use to anyone. So I think these are the factors why the Americans did what they did and left behind certain equipment and took whatever was possible. Yeah, Adi?
That's interesting that you say that. So, a counter to something like this is that the Americans pretty much knew that the Taliban would take over the Afghan National Army, and they were, at the probably about last 10 days before the evacuation. That thing was before the takeover of Kabul. I think things were pretty clear to everyone that this is going to happen. But the Americans still decided to, do what they had to do in terms of the Air Force. But we also see a contrary point of view to support what you're saying is when they cleared up the Kabul airport after the 31st, everything was destroyed. So there was obviously no, use for anything that was left there. And they literally destroyed everything. And there were photographs where the Taliban were very, very upset about this whole thing. And they said, these are our national assets and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
That's interesting, sir. Sir, let's talk about the operational factor. What is the operational level of the assets that have been left behind. Why I say this is because you say that some of the assets, most of the assets are not flyworthy. Having said that,
Mhm.
the gray zone operation that the Taliban has been conducting in terms of the information warfare, they've been putting out pictures of these things flying. The leadership actually went on to in a joyride in a Mi-17 as well, and that was also put out. Who are the pilots that are flying these so-called display missions, and do they have the capability of training new pilots in terms of their neighbors as well? One of the biggest things about an air power is I'm sorry, I'm going to just put out these a series of questions because they're all interconnected, and I think you'll be able to answer them
Yeah,
in a
please,
row then,
please.
sir. What is
Yeah,
the maintainability? The spare parts is one of the biggest problems for any air asset. And the biggest example of something like this is Pakistan, who's facing a lot of challenges with regards spare parts for its F-16s and Mirages. And of course, air assets are good to fly if they don't have any weapons. Um, they're they're just joyride machines. So how do you see this entire situation that I just mentioned, sir?
yeah. A very valid question, Adi. And fall in sequence. Okay, we have talked about so many assets are there in Afghanistan Air Force and some, to some extent, US assets. But what is their status now? And can they be sustained or not? Very valid question. But before I answer your question, Adi, I like to just take a minute on one of the remarks which you made, which I'm not in agreement. You said that Americans knew that Taliban is going to take over, correct? That part is true. But when would the Taliban be able to take over is the question.
Absolutely.
So, what has happened is that Americans have been, or the Westerners, I will say, coalition, this thing, have been training the Afghan forces for 20 years. Yeah.
Mm.
They've been empowering them. They've been giving them equipment, they've been telling them the tactics, they've been training them, and they've been giving them money and all sort of things, all sort of capability enhancement. This is my analysis that in their assessment, that is, the Westerners assessed that Afghan forces will be able to hold Taliban at least for 6 months. If not 6 months, at least 3, 4 months at least.
90 days
And
is
by
what
then,
they had said, sir.
they didn't expect that
Correct.
the Taliban will take over immediately. Taliban started their activities from February onwards, moment this thing was signed. I mean, they didn't honor that, will not do this thing. Their philosophy was, fight and talk simultaneously. While talking, they were fighting and taking over areas. Now, where the Westerners didn't do a realistic assessment, or where they went wrong, the major factor where they went wrong was the mind factor, which I keep telling you. They couldn't assess that Afghan forces, mind-wise, will be able to take on the Taliban or not. They just collapse. I mean, they didn't want to fight. They didn't fight at all. And there are more reasons to it. I've written it on my blog in a very concise manner. Why did the Taliban forces collapse so fast? Anyway, that is one part of it. Now, coming to your question, which is a very, very valid question, what is the status of these equipment, especially air power related assets, and whether they can be sustained in the longer run or not? Okay, so you yourself brought on a lot of factors. Okay. So, what reports I've seen in the media, Adi, is that 25% of the Afghan Air Force, I believe, flew out to Uzbekistan. Okay, there are quite a few reports also that certain aircraft and about 100 odd men and also flew out to Tajikistan, so Central Asian Republic countries. And they say to Uzbekistan it was almost 46 aircraft, 22 fixed wing, and 24 helicopters. That's a very large chunk, and about 600 odd airmen. So what I'm trying to say is 25 to 30% already flew out of fear, out of whatever it is, and their disposal is not known. Whether the Uzbekistan or the Kazakhstan, they will return it, or Americans will claim it, or they will use it, or they will give to some. This is not known as it. But at the moment, these are not available in Afghanistan. Okay. Now, as far as flyable is concerned, we talked about the strength earlier, 200 odd, 211 odd aircraft, out of which majority 150 odd helicopters. So they say, one of the reports says that only 24 Cessnas 208 are flyable. Okay. Out of helicopters, only 12 or 15 are flyable. I am not very sure about these figures because there's so many reports coming and there is a fog of war and there's no clarity as such. But these are the figures which are floating around. Okay. Then the next part of it is, there were, when they were in in Afghanistan, there were 17,000 odd contractors who were supporting the air operations or the military operations. I won't say air operation, I would say military operations. Now, when the July, the process started, these civilians also left, these contractors also left. Actually, by July onwards, the serviceability rate of everything started coming down. For example, some figures are available in open domain, like AC 208 fleet. In April, they were 93% serviceable. By June, they were 60 down to 63%. Okay, Black Hawks from 77% serviceability, they came down to 39% within a span of 3 months when these people started withdrawing. That means attack helicopters was a similar fate. What I'm trying to get at in a broad sense is the moment this support vanished, the serviceability came down drastically within 3 months from as high as 90%, 80% to down to some 40%, 50%. Okay, that is the effect. Okay, now I talked about the pilot and aircrew. Very interesting. See, Taliban started attacking pilots before the US withdrawal itself because they felt these pilots are being used against them. So if you kill the pilots, the air power capability will go down. They started assassinating them. Okay, so now when the Americans' cover was left, most of the Afghan pilots were scared that they will be isolated and killed by Taliban. So they fled across. That is the reason. And secondly, all those who go out of the country, they're hiding. They're not disclosing that they're pilots. They're hiding because their fear is that they will get targeted by this thing. So that is the status of the pilots. So who flies these machines? Next issue is fuel. Aviation fuel. You need aviation fuel to sustain these operations. Okay, sooner or later, whatever stocks are, they will run out. And where will they get it from? Iran, they're not very friendly with. China and Pakistan, okay, will they give, not give? Okay, there is no money to buy fuel. Where do they buy from? Okay, if Americans put sanctions, the availability of fuel again becomes problem along with a whole lot of other things. Then another factor which needs to be kept in mind is the fuel supply chain can always be targeted. In future, I'm talking about. So fuel is another issue. Now you talked about maintainability. These machines are very, very intense maintenance hungry. There are 4 levels of maintenance in maintaining these machines, or 3 levels they called I level, D level, and L level, and or first line, second line. So amount of maintenance which is required is spares, skilled manpower, trained manpower. Part is expensive. Where will that come from? Okay, so all these factors combined, the availability of these machines is very, very doubtful. Okay, then air power uses all targeting. It's basically you're getting your targets, you're selecting and attacking them. There are 2 aspects to it. One is the weapon, and second is the intelligence. Now, weapons, where will you get from? Okay, there's not unlimited stock. Somebody has to give you weapon. They don't produce weapon. They don't have industry. Even we buy weapons. Where will they get weapons from? Second is intelligence. Okay, human they can get, but the vital information, which is the aerial intelligence, if those assets are not flyworthy, how will you get it? Okay, all this is fine. Next is the cost and the funds. There is the money. They on AIDS, Afghanistan. Okay, then they buy everything from food, medicine, oil, clothing, everything. Now, what will be, even if they are able to generate some funds, what will be the priority? Not fuel or the weapons or this thing. Priority will be basics, the food and the health facilities, medicine and other things. Correct? Now, US support. Let's talk about US support here itself. US has said that they will provide over the horizon support. What that means is basically some sort of air asset required from some other bases like Pakistan. This is an interesting thing. Let me divert a bit this thing. And all this process was going on. They must have asked Pakistan to let them operate from one of the Pakistan bases. So Pakistan, the smart that they are, they said instead of operating from our base, you give the armed drones to us, we'll operate for you. So they wanted to derive mileage out of that situation. Anyway, this is just by the way. This thing. So now US support, what would be the US support in terms of money, in terms of spares, in terms of weapon, in terms of skill manpower, will they give or will not give? Okay, they will send the people in or not? I don't think so. Anyway, all this is time will tell what sort of support will. So keeping all these factors in mind, I don't think much of these assets will be of any value. The second aspect is when the Americans went, they took out all this thing. There are reports which are in the open domain which say that these contractors or the people who were supporting them when they left, they took all the proprietary softwares. They took all the sensitive weapon systems. From the helicopters, they removed the missile defense systems and tracking software and took it away. Okay, what was left was, some Black Hawk and one A-29 aircraft, and these platforms were unflyable, just shells. Okay, there are some funny pictures floating around in the social media. On the wings of this fixed wing aircraft, the Taliban are doing jula. And today also somebody sent me a very nice caption, Wing Commander, and they show a helicopter with the on the rotor. Taliban people are sitting and sort of a merry-go-round. So these are fun pictures. But getting back to the thing is that US, whatever they left, is not much of that. That is the bottom. Yeah, Adi.
That's an interesting thing that you mentioned, that the wing commander, because see, I mean, it's a joke as well, but one must understand the level of competence with regards air power. I mean, a lot of countries in the world who are modern and modern air forces find it difficult to maintain their air power to a certain level of serviceability, as you were just mentioning, that the serviceability just dropped into half. I mean, that's something
Yeah.
I personally was not aware of, and that tells you a lot about what the serviceability ratios would be today. This we were talking in the figures, I think you were giving about 2 months ago. So, what is
Yeah.
the status today, which is 3 weeks down, Taliban land being formed? That's a very interesting thing, sir. I think it's going to be quite a surprise for us to see going forward in the future these machines still flying, unless they get some help from the neighbors. Which brings me to my next question to you is, the Chinese would be looking at American equipment. Of course, it's their arch nemesis. So they would be looking at this kind of an equipment. As you mentioned, Pakistan. I'm sure Pakistan is standing right there with a bowl just for some dropping somewhere or the other. If they wanted the drones, I mean, whatever it is, considering the kind of influence that the Pakistanis have today in Afghanistan, do you think there is a possibility for this equipment, whatever it is, to get uh, in the hands of the Chinese for reverse engineering, or in the hands of the Pakistanis for their Air Force assets to kind of try and fix them and maintain them? Is there a possibility of something like this happening, sir?
Once again, very logical question, and this is also doing the rounds. So what I'll do is, Adi, I'll cover this as well as I'll cover a little bit more about Pakistan and China involvement in the whole game. Not only from air assets point of view, but overall military as well as other geoeconomics and other aspects. So as far as, let me talk about the air assets first. Both will definitely have a look, or may have already had a look at the equipment which is there in the Afghanistan, especially the equipment which the Americans have left behind. Okay, as far as getting these is concerned, at maximum what they can do is, the Taliban, they can sell and get money out of it, but that is, small arms and ammunition. As far as air asset is concerned, as I said, empty shells are as good as, scrap. You can sell it by the weight of metal. Okay, there is nothing worthwhile in those assets. And while we're saying that, I don't think there is anything worthwhile doing reverse engineering out of these. Whatever must have been worth, Americans must have destroyed by now. So definitely these two countries will look into it, but I don't think they'll get much of value out of it. Small things here and there they might gain out of it. As far as Pakistan is concerned, I don't think they're in a situation even to buy these equipment of Taliban. And if even they buy, economically, they are not in a very good state. And who will buy, unwanted stuff unnecessarily wasting money on it? So that is this thing. And but by the way, a lot of videos also floating around, showing shops in Pakistan where all the American military hardware and military equipment is being sold. Okay, so these are basically, I think, from the containers which were confiscated or looted during border crossing during the time of turmoil and all those things. And they look very, very fancy equipment and all, but they're limited in numbers and not very major high tech equipment as such. Okay, having said that, let me talk about Pakistan role a little bit, if you allow me to. Let's talk about Pakistan. What is the Pakistan interest? Although I think you've done a lot of videos on Afghanistan and all these issues and all, I'll just give you a little bit of my perspective.
Absolutely, sir.
One is, what is the Pakistan? One is the strategic depth which they talk about. That Afghanistan in their favor will give them some strategic depth. They always felt that their width is very narrow and they don't have the strategic depth.
Mm.
Second is, security from the West. That's what they're looking for. At the moment, their forces were tied up, whatever you say, towards that side also. And if they get freed, they will get full attention towards India. Second is the tribal areas. They will get some sort of control over them. That's what they think. I have a different view altogether on that. Okay. So that is what is their major interest of Pakistan. But historically, if you've seen, Adi, whichever country, whichever organization has been armed by somebody, like you call it terrorist, or but if you have like Taliban was created by US to counter Soviets. Okay, so what I'm getting at is every organization which have been armed has always got back to the organization which supported it or created it. You see history, even in India also. So it is, it's like the nurture snake. If you nurture a snake, later it's going to bite you. That is a theory. Okay, so Pakistan, to my mind, is playing with fire. They're playing with a double-edged sword. Okay, they're talking about good Taliban and bad Taliban. They are all chips from the same block here. There's no good Taliban and bad Taliban. You can't say that Afghanistan Taliban is good and Pakistan Taliban because they're creating problems there is not good. Okay. When the infighting starts, like this example of Panjshir, where the battle took place, something like that. I have a theory that fighting these are warlords in Afghanistan. Sooner or later they're going to fight. If external enemy is there, then they invite. In case they have no external enemy, they'll fight within themselves. When the infighting starts, with Pakistan or China, whom are they going to support? The devil or the beast? So either way, one person will be against them. So I think sooner or later, they run into these problems because they're playing with fire. Now take China. China's interests are firstly security. Security in terms of, their Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province and Afghanistan soil being used as a training camps or launching camps. Okay. So they have Pakistan and China, by the way, already told Taliban not to associate with two organizations, TTP and ETIM. TTP is Taliban Pakistan, and ETIM is East Turkmenistan Islamic Movement. Okay, first one is Pakistan is more affected, and second one China is more affected. So they are asking Taliban not to associate with them. Okay, how long will they not associate? They are also part of the same groups and all that. Okay, then China's interest is socio-economic corridor, the BRI, security of CPEC in Pakistan, and extension of BRI into Afghanistan, maybe more access to Central Asian or the Asian region. Right? So that is the economic interest. Third is the natural resources. One of the reports I was reading, and it assessed the natural resources of Afghanistan to the tune of 1 trillion rupees or maybe or dollars, $1 trillion or more. I don't know where they're hidden and where are these hiding. Copper mines they have been talking about, even Taliban is talking about that China will help them in maybe reviving the copper mines. Fourth is very interesting. This has not got much of media traction. Fourth concern of China is a golden crescent. Afghanistan, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan. The drug cartel and the drug this thing route. Chinese psyche is very much affected by these drugs. The opium wars 1 and 2. Their feeling is that century of humility, that century of humiliation which they suffered, was the origin genesis was because of the use of drugs and opium by Chinese, which they got addicted, and the opium wars which took place. So they are very, very particular, very touchy about this aspect also. This aspect has not come out much. Okay, now very interesting. Well, on China, actually, China, I get carried away because I keep studying China a bit. Just give me a minute or two more.
Absolutely, sir.
In my opinion, China has already been involved actively in the peace process. Okay,
true,
and they have offered trilateral, quadrilateral discussions. They have already engaged the Taliban. And Taliban have already been invited to China. They have visited in China. They are already engaging them. Okay, and also let me tell you one thing: US staying in Afghanistan was in China's favor. They were not keen for the US to leave. There are two reasons for it. One is it gave them some sort of security because the US were able to control a bit of all these terrorist elements. And the second reason, very interesting, is that US were tied down in Afghanistan. Now what will happen is if the US is not tied down in Afghanistan, they can concentrate fully on China. These are wheels within wheels here. Okay. Now, as far as China's engagement in future is concerned, I feel, this is my personal feeling, the Chinese are too smart. They will let the Pakistan do all their dirty work. They will give them monetary support, okay, and which has already been committed and announced that
Yes, sir.
Taliban is also announcing and China is saying that we will rebuild and reinvest in Pakistan. But they will always derive the pound of flesh out of it. That checkbook diplomacy or whatever it is in terms of, getting control over the mining or natural resources or actually ensuring their safety. It's like giving hafta to warlords. Ki bhaiya, this is your hafta, and now you make sure that
Nothing happens to me.
your Afghanistan is not used as anything against China. So this is sort of hafta
True,
tactics.
true, sir.
So in my mind, they will provide assistance and not capability building in Afghanistan. And boots on ground or the actual intervention, definitely no, unless it's a direct threat onto them. Then only extreme measure. But I don't think the situation will come. And even if they provide some capability, they will ensure that there are sufficient safeguards that the capability tomorrow does not get used against them. So this is my personal take on it. So at the moment they're giving hafta, and if at all they go into higher this thing of making capability, then make sure that the safeguards are there. So that is my views on assistance by Pakistan, China, and US. Now coming to India, just one more minute.
Sir.
I think our policy was very good. I think we're very right of not sending boots on ground. A lot of people have burnt their hands on it, and it is not right for us to send. Whatever we did in terms of assistance was good enough, and we common people of Afghanistan have a lot of regard for India because two reasons. One is we didn't give them aid only, we gave them capability enhancement. We trained those people. You stand on your own feet. Number one. This has given us a lot of good vibes and good feelings from them. The second reason is that we didn't seek anything in return. We were actually genuinely helping them and not seeking that you will give us a favor or something. So I think these two factors, which our policy was very good, and we have a lot of goodwill in common people in Afghanistan. At the moment, we have to wait and watch. And secondly, we have to keep the Taliban also in view. Of course, in case they are the legitimate or whatever word you want to use, they are the government and this thing. They are the control. You have to engage with them. You cannot live without it. So it is engage them, wait and watch, and see how it progresses. I think so far our policy has been good, and similarly in future as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, sir. As far as engagement is concerned, I am with you on this because at the end of it, people forget, and the problem with a lot of the so-called strategic community in India, people who don't understand this game is the fact that they've forgotten when India pulled out its nurses from the teeth of the ISIS. There has to be some modes of communication that India had even with that group to get its own people out. I mean, you have to look at your national interest. And I'm sorry, but this is something I feel very passionately about. This whole nonsense of they are terrorists, why are you talking to them, and this and that. I think this is absolute rubbish because at the end of it, whoever's there, if for my own national interest, if I need to shake my hands with the devil, I think we need to do it. And there should be no two questions about it. It is
definitely. We'll talk about it. If you give me a minute, I'll just take a minute. Just a few concluding thoughts, although even at the cost of repetition. As I said, Afghanistan people have not understood. It's a country of warlords. Fighting is in their blood. Okay, they'll keep fighting. Okay, if not externally, internally. Okay, so Taliban has been able. So this is where the Western world or the outside world has not been able to understand. Americans have burned their hand, Russians have burned their hand. Before that, Britishers have burned their hand, and now it is Chinese turn. I think they should get into it. Anyway, I don't think they will get into it. And other thing is, air assets. I don't think there is anything of value which has been left by the Americans. We're not to worry about it. And even if whatever has been left, it's very difficult to sustain it or to operationalize it because there are a whole lot of factors which are required. It's a very costly affair. The assets are not there, space are not there, skilled manpower is not there, fuel is a problem, pilots is a problem. So it's a very, very difficult proposition to operationalize and make it to a certain standard. It can be done with external help, but what help will come, that is wait and watch. Okay, as far as India is concerned, I feel we have been doing quite well So far as Afghanistan policy is concerned, I think they can watch, engage them, and then take a decision as this thing. So these are a few of the concluding thoughts which I had. And thank you very much, Adi. And let's talk about next interesting subject soon.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you for the closing comments as well. I'd just like to say, of course, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, especially with the immense knowledge of air power that you've got, and bringing things down to a level of understanding that a lot of people can grasp. Air power is a very technical subject, and it needs to be understood by a lot of us for us to actually comment on it. And I'd urge people to actually know before they, comment on something like that. Thank you, sir, for another opportunity to chew your brain about the question that the Taliban has an air force. Till next time, sir. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, Adi. Thanks a lot. Jai Hind.
Thank you.